The illusion of safety. Why the avoidant feels safer in the cold. They want love. They really do. But not in the way you've imagined it. Not in the warm, soul-touching way that you've dreamed of. For the avoidant, real love feels like stepping onto thin ice. It might hold, but it also might crack. And the thought of falling through, of being emotionally engulfed, terrifies them far more than the idea of loneliness ever could. So what do? They choose the cold. They choose the distance. They choose the silence. And you might ask yourself, why? Why would someone repeatedly abandon something real, something beautiful, something that had every chance to heal them? Because in the world of the avoidant, warmth is a threat. It promises things they don't believe they deserve. It awakens parts of them they were taught to bury. It brings back a history they've spent years trying to forget. You might think they're choosing emotional cruelty. You might believe they're trying to punish you. But the truth is far more tragic than that. They're trying to protect themselves. From you. From the connection. From their own past. From their own hearts. Because when you've been emotionally abandoned, neglected, or punished for having needs, love starts to look like a loaded gun, not a sanctuary. And what they learned from a very young age was that if they numbed the ache, if they detached first, if they could stay one emotional step ahead of everyone, then maybe they'd be safe. This is why when things get too good, too intimate, too close, the avoidant gets cold, withdraws, shuts down, becomes someone unrecognizable to the person who once held their hand. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they feel too much and have no blueprint for how to survive those feelings without imploding. So instead of risking the overwhelm, they default to their oldest survival strategy, disconnection. And it looks like silence. It looks like apathy. It looks like ghosting. But underneath that cold exterior is a child who once asked for closeness and was met with punishment, guilt, or emotional exile. So they told themselves, never again. Never again will I need someone that much. Never again will I let someone close enough to destroy me. Never again will I be weak enough to hope. This internal pact becomes their prison, because what keeps them safe also keeps them alone, and what once protected them now isolates them. You see, the avoidant isn't trying to win a power struggle. They're trying to survive an emotional war that started long before you met them. And that war has one rule. Don't feel, don't need, don't get close. So when you offer warmth, connection, emotional presence, you're not just offering love. You're challenging their entire worldview. You're asking them to trust what once betrayed them. You're inviting them into a space they have no emotional map for. And in their world, that invitation feels dangerous. Because intimacy isn't interpreted as safety. It's experienced as exposure. And exposure has always come with pain. This is why the avoidant chooses the cold over the real. Because to them, real means real risk, real heartbreak, real loss of control. But the cold is predictable. It's numb. It's silent. It's familiar. And most of all, it feels safe. Even if it means losing the very thing they want most. Even if it means pushing away the one person who finally saw them. Even if it means living a life half felt and half loved. To you, it's heartbreaking. To them, it's survival. And unless something disrupts that script, they will continue choosing the cold over the real. Again and again. But what if something could break that pattern? What if the cold wasn't their home, but a hiding place? What if the real wasn't the threat, but the only place they could finally breathe? When intimacy feels like a threat, not a gift. You held them with care. You listened. You were consistent. You loved them slowly. And they still pulled away. Why? Why would someone recoil from a love so patient, so sincere, so clearly safe? Because to the avoidant, love has never been a gift. It's been a trigger. They learned early on that being vulnerable meant being controlled, that sharing their feelings was a mistake, that being too much made them unlovable, that needing comfort made them weak. So now, as adults, when they meet someone emotionally available, something unexpected happens. They don't relax. They brace. They start scanning for danger. They anticipate rejection. They mentally rehearse their escape. Your kindness reminds them of the caregiver who only showed affection conditionally. Your presence echoes the one who eventually left. Your love stirs up a ghost they spent their whole life running from. They don't pull away because of you. They pull away because your closeness reawakens their trauma, and their nervous system goes into full defense mode. It's not logic. It's wiring. It's not cruelty. It's fear. It's not that they don't want you. It's that they don't know how to want without feeling terror alongside it. Because in their emotional memory, love didn't mean safety. It meant exposure. It meant needing someone who would hurt you. It meant craving affection from someone who could withhold it at will. So now, when love shows up with open arms, they freeze. They distance. They sabotage. They confuse unpredictability with passion and certainty with boredom. Because if it's real, if it's kind, if it's steady, that means it has the power to devastate them. And devastation is something they swore they'd never feel again. So they leave first, or they ice over, or they convince themselves you're not the one. Because it's easier to walk away from love than to relive the helplessness of losing it. You might have heard them say, "I'm not ready for anything serious. I need space. I just don't know what I want right now." But what they really mean is, "I don't trust what I feel. I don't trust what you'll do to me if I let you in. I've never felt safe in love before, so I don't know how to be in this with you." Their emotional wounds are like landmines, invisible but volatile, and when you step close, you unknowingly set them off, not because you did something wrong, but because you did something right. You got close, and closeness, to them, means danger. So they retreat to the only place that has ever felt familiar. The cold, where no one can reach them, where no one can need them, where no one can see them unravel. And you're left wondering what you did. But it was never about you. It was about the part of them that never learned love without fear, closeness without shame, connection without collapse. You offered realness, but they were conditioned to respond to realness with self-protection, not receptivity. And that's why you can give them your best, and they still run. Because inside, a war is raging between what they want and what they fear, between reaching out and shutting down. They don't know how to feel safe being seen. They don't know how to trust your steadiness. They don't know how to receive the very love they say they're looking for. It's not a matter of logic. It's not about how good of a partner you are. It's about emotional survival. And they are still operating from a playbook written in childhood, one that told them, "Don't trust love. It disappears. Don't show your heart. It'll be used against you. Don't depend." That's how they control you. So when you show up fully, they don't know what to do with you. They expect the mask, the game, the chase, the withdrawal. But not honesty, not consistency, not love with no strings. And because they don't have a model for that kind of love, they push it away. They test it. They break it. Because if it survives, maybe then they can believe it. But most of the time, it doesn't survive. Because the one offering the love is made to feel like the enemy, or worse, like they were never enough to begin with. The avoidant doesn't mean to hurt you, but they do. Because until they confront the fear that intimacy triggers, they'll always confuse safety with suffocation. and they'll run from the very thing that could finally set them free. Safety in the simulation, the emotional armor of the avoidant. There's a truth that cuts deeper than most are ready to admit. Avoidants don't just prefer the cold, they need it. They choose it, not in rebellion, but in protection. And while others are yearning for warmth, intimacy, and connection, the avoidant is doing everything they can to simulate closeness, without ever truly entering it. This is where the simulation begins, not because they want to lie, but because the truth, the full truth, is too dangerous to live inside. To love deeply is to risk annihilation for an avoidant, not because the other person is cruel, but because love demands openness, and openness, to them, is vulnerability, and vulnerability is where all the wounds were born. So they build the simulation. Here's how it works. The mask of functionality. On the outside, avoidants can appear incredibly composed. They know how to function. They hold jobs, excel in their careers, make charming conversation, even participate in romantic relationships to an extent. To most people, they seem like strong, independent, reserved individuals. But underneath that polished surface is a carefully maintained emotional bunker. Inside, they are managing a controlled disconnection. They may say, "I love you." They may even believe it in moments. But the moment closeness becomes too real, the simulation steps in. Cold responses, detachment, a sudden pullback. It's not spite, it's safety. The simulation allows them to appear connected without being connected. Emotional distance as survival. To the avoidant, intimacy often feels like a trap. They may crave it and fantasize about it. But the moment it arrives, it activates a subconscious alarm system. Emotional closeness mirrors the chaos of their early experiences. For many avoidants, vulnerability was met with punishment, neglect, criticism, or worse, betrayal. So, the nervous system learned. Shut it down. Stay cold. Stay distant. Stay safe. And so, they don't let go in relationships. They manage the emotional distance, sometimes without even realizing it. They ghost. They stay vague. They avoid deep conversations. They withdraw during conflict. They shut down when you say, "I need you." Not because they don't care, but because caring hurts. Because closeness feels like standing naked in a storm. They were never taught how to survive. The simulation says, pretend to be in the room, while keeping the door locked from the inside. Why they need the cold. The cold is not the absence of love. It's a response to love. It's what they reach for when love gets too real. They've built their emotional world like a submarine. Underwater, sealed, pressurized. It keeps them alive. It shields them from emotional implosion. And you? You're outside the glass, knocking, hoping they'll come up for air. But surfacing means risking drowning. Here's what no one tells you. They do feel deeply. Avoidants are often flooded with emotion, but they've trained themselves not to show it because they were never taught what to do with it. So they put on the calm, detached, unaffected face and bury the chaos underneath. That calm exterior? That's not confidence. That's emotional self-containment, a survival tactic, a shield. How the simulation interacts with you. If you're in a relationship with an avoidant, you've likely felt the dissonance. They say the right things. They appear present. They may even reach out after a disconnect. But something always feels missing, like you're only half held, like the love is only partially returned. That's because you're engaging with the simulation version of connection. It's love edited, vulnerability filtered, presence performed. You might question yourself. Am I too much? Why do they run when I get close? Why do I feel lonely even when we're together. Here's the devastating irony. Avoidants don't want you to feel that way, but they don't know how to show up differently, because real connection threatens their entire emotional system. To you, intimacy is oxygen. To them, it's fire. And so, they keep the simulation going. Long after the relationship should have deepened, long after you've proven your love, they keep choosing the cold because it is predictable, controllable, safe. The pain behind the preference. We often assume the avoidant partner is emotionally unavailable by choice, that they simply don't care. But this is the greatest misunderstanding of all. Avoidants often care so much they shut down in self-defense. The cold isn't apathy, it's armor. Somewhere along the way, they made a vow. Never again will I let someone see the parts of me that were rejected. Never again will I need someone so much that I can be destroyed by them. So they disappear, or stay just far enough to feel like they're with you, but never really give you all of themselves. The simulation is their last protection. And to dismantle it means facing the one thing they fear the most. That real love, true, exposed, open-hearted love might actually heal them. But healing requires trust. And trust is the most terrifying thing of all. The cold fortress, a defense built from pain. They didn't always choose the cold. It wasn't their first instinct. The fortress wasn't their home. It was their hiding place. Somewhere, before they ever grew into that avoidant identity, they were someone who felt too much, too deeply, too quickly. And every time they reached for love, they touched a wound, not a hand, not comfort, just emptiness, neglect, or worse, punishment. So they built it, brick by brick, emotion by emotion, a castle of coldness, a home for their protection, not their connection. To you, their emotional distance felt like rejection, but to them, it was survival. You tried to speak their language. You tried to enter the fortress, but every time you got close, they shut the gate, bolted it, threw the key into a moat of dismissiveness. Not because they didn't want you there, but because your presence stirred a memory of warmth they weren't allowed to have. You reminded them of their own humanity, and that was too painful. They began to view love not as connection, but as exposure, as danger. The cold became their comfort. Their numbness became their peace. Not because it felt good, but because it felt safe. This is the tragedy of the avoidant heart. They lock themselves out of the very thing they crave most. And they do it with a quiet sort of pride, because they think it's strength, because they believe vulnerability is weakness. You, being warm, threatened everything they built. Your eyes, too soft. Your tone, too tender. Your presence, too real. And real is terrifying. Real means their mask would fall. Real means they'd have to say, I'm scared. I need you. I've been alone for too long. But they don't say that. Because they can't. Because every time they tried in the past, they were abandoned, dismissed, laughed at, or punished for needing. So now, they do the abandoning first. They preemptively dismiss you. They create the ice, so they don't feel the burn. You might think they hate intimacy, but what they really hate is the grief that comes with trusting it. They'd rather control the outcome through distance than risk being helpless inside closeness. The cold, to them, is not loneliness. It's protection. It's what keeps them from reliving the emotional war they lost in childhood. You ask why they ran. You ask why they were distant, why they couldn't just let you in. But here's the brutal truth. You reminded them of a version of themselves they had to kill off to survive. That soft version, that open version, that needy version. So they buried it. And every time you got close, you stood over that grave. You woke it up, and they panicked. Avoidants don't choose the cold because it's better. They choose it because it's all they were left with. Because in a world where connection once betrayed them, detachment feels like control. But here's the secret they won't tell you. They're not at peace. They're just numb. They're not indifferent. They're just exhausted from pretending to be. And beneath all that distance, beneath the fortress and the frost, is a person still aching for the very thing they fear. When love becomes the mirror they fear most. They didn't run because you were wrong. They ran because you were right. Too revealing. Too much like the truth they've been avoiding. You weren't just love. You were a mirror, a reflection of everything they buried. And they couldn't bear to look. To you, intimacy meant closeness. To them, it meant exposure. Not to you, but to themselves. You made them feel seen, not for the role they perform, but for the soul they suppress. And that's the one thing they never wanted uncovered. So instead of softening, they stiffen. Instead of leaning in, they recoil. Instead of gratitude, they give you silence, or sarcasm, or indifference. You think it's rejection, but it's recoil. You think it's disinterest, but it's terror. See, when someone offers them safe love, it triggers every memory of unsafe love. The old blueprint rises. If I open up, I'll be punished. If I care too much, I'll lose them. If I show emotion, I'll be left. So they preempt the pain. They ghost. They distance. They nitpick. They sabotage. And in doing so, they repeat the cycle. The very same one they swore they'd escape. Because cold is familiar. Real is too raw. But what they don't understand, what you need to hear, is this. Your warmth was never the problem. Your presence was not the trigger. It was their response to presence that carried the wound. They didn't leave because you failed. They left because they couldn't stay. Without confronting the version of themselves they exiled long ago. You cracked their armor, not with confrontation, but with compassion. And that's what frightened them most. Not your anger, not your passion, but your gentleness, because they didn't know how to receive it without feeling undeserving. They weren't prepared to be held by someone who didn't expect them to break. They were only prepared to defend, to flee, to keep repeating the pattern. But if there's one thing you must remember, it's this. Their response was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of their unresolved war. You didn't fail. You just touched the one place they buried, and they weren't ready to resurrect it. You were the warmth they didn't believe still existed, the real they couldn't accept, the closeness they craved, and feared, and fought, all at once. And maybe it was never yours to fix. Maybe your role wasn't to break through, but to reveal what was still frozen in them. Sometimes, your love doesn't get to stay, but it still leaves something behind. A question, a shift, a silence that echoes longer than they expected. And even if they never say it, even if they bury it again, they'll remember, not what you said, but how they felt, when they were almost real. If this touched something deep in you, some truth you've lived but couldn't name, you're not alone. This is why we speak. This is why we name what others bury. Because healing begins in the places we were told to hide. If you're on your own inner Odyssey, subscribe. Because these stories, they don't just belong to avoidance. They belong to all of us who were once too afraid to be seen,